This is a SportsE Media production, part of QuietLoud Studios, the podcast network where reflection meets amplification.
Alrighty, everybody. Here we are with episode number 8 on the RAV, the Raw, Authentic, and Vulnerable podcast. As always, thank you to all of the fine gentlemen behind the scenes at SportsEpreneur that have created this platform, not just for me. I know they have other hosts hosting their own podcast, but just truly grateful and feeling blessed with how season 2 has gone thus far. Again, season 1 is all the way back 4 years ago while I was still over in Norway playing. A lot of growth and expansion has taken place in these 4 years. So the power, the depth, the insights in the first 7 episodes here in season 2 have been far more powerful than anything that I produced in season 1. And today I've got such a powerful guest coming on. We met, I think maybe 4 or 5 months ago, Rob. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. I know we've had some back and forth and loving each other's content on the different social pages. But nonetheless, don't forget, for all the listeners, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with as many people as you possibly can. This podcast is great. I love how it all just kind of flows organically. And that's the juice for me. That's the raw aspect. Again, no preset questions. But nonetheless, we're going to get started here. I'm going to pass it over now to my guest, Rob, for him to introduce himself. And then we'll take the conversation wherever it needs to go. So, Rob, go ahead, brother.
Well, first off, Jacob, it's been a pleasure getting to know you. As you said, we met a few months ago. The exact date, not quite sure. So don't expect an anniversary gift in a year from now, whenever that date is. But that said, I think, what brought us together is sort of the like-mindedness and a little bit of similarities in our journeys. Mine being a Canadian kid growing up just in a suburb of Toronto, and coming from a sports family. My dad was a hockey player and a football player. Actually, also a little bit of a track athlete. Went to the storied St. Michael's College in Toronto, where he honed his craft at both hockey and football. And was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to attend Michigan Tech on both a football and hockey scholarship. So both my brother and I were brought up in a very athletic home. We took to hockey very quickly. And for me, it was just a passion. Loved the game, loved sports, was always outside playing, back then, and, until the lights came on and we had to come home for dinner. And, the area that we grew up, although it's all exploded now, there was a lot of fields and empty areas where we would turn them into ponds. And that's where we honed a lot of our skills, was just out playing pond hockey. No rules. If you wanted the puck, you had to go get it. And so that was an awesome experience growing up. Played in what was the old MTHL, which is the GTHL now. Played minor hockey with mostly with the Toronto Marlies, and couple of years at the end of my minor hockey career with the Toronto Red Wings. Was drafted in the OHL 52nd overall in 1986, and had a decision to make between going to the O and playing junior or pursuing a scholarship. With my father's influence, I kind of leaned towards the scholarship route. Was drafted by the Sudbury Wolves. I think they were a little disappointed when I told them I wasn't going to go to camp and I was going to stay back. The promise I made to my father was I would finish grade 12 and see what scholarship opportunities presented themselves. And if I didn't like anything, I could always go back to play in the O. I had a number of offers. I played 1 year junior B back then, and I actually chose to go to Michigan Tech. So I was my father's alma mater, and I was going in there with a little bit of a goal. My dad still held the record for most points by a freshman defenseman, so my goal was to go in there and break his record. I'll kind of end it there, but that's sort of how I grew up, and here I am today, many, many years later, sitting here at 55 years old, back into the game. I spent about 25 years in the corporate world. Was in a motorcycle accident in 2015, going through a challenging time in my life. And through that experience, was able to open up a channel in my mind where I was able to look at myself introspectively. I had a lot of time. I had 40 days on my back and 9 surgeries after the accident. They were able to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. and, and so you get a lot of time to think when you're laying on your back in a hospital for 40 days about who you are and who you want to be. Even though I was 45 at the time and long past my hockey career, there was still a lot of answers and empty spaces that I was looking to fill, not only from my career but as a person. And so really, what I do today, very similar to you, is I'm a servant leader, trying to give back to a community that did a lot of great things for me, even though at the end of that career, at about 26, 27 years old, I felt it was taking from me and I wasn't getting anything from it. But what I learned was it was only because I allowed myself to feel that way. And when you go into the corporate world and you think it's going to change, it's no different. Life continues to throw those curveballs and a little bit of adversity your way. So really, here I am sitting here today, 5 years into the development of Mindset Body Bank, which is the name of my company, based out of Hamilton, Ontario, working with primarily hockey players, but a lot of other sports as well. I've got swimmers that are at Olympic level. I've got a young football player just signed with the New Orleans Saints. That actually, football was the one sport that opened up to me, which I thought would have been hockey, which is interesting, and we can kind of talk about that as we go here.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first and foremost, again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your introduction. And after that, there's an area that I want to go to in regards to the motorcycle accident that you experienced. But before we get there, can you talk a little bit about what the process was like for you in making that decision to not go to Sudbury and to ultimately go to Mission Tech? Was your father playing at Michigan Tech, and perhaps a little bit of family competition and knowing that he held a record that you would have the potential to break, being a defenseman yourself? So again, what was that process like for you? Because I know there's a lot of players in the hockey community that experience those same things. They get drafted into a major junior league, but perhaps they want to go the college route. So again, what was that process like for you? Was it a difficult decision? I know that those decisions, they then lead to difficult conversations. At some point, you would have had to have called the Sudbury team to let them know you're not coming. So again, can you just talk about what that entire process was like for you?
So first of all, it was an honor, to be drafted. And I know I work with a lot of teams, a lot of the U16 teams in the city here in Toronto, a lot of players. They spend all of that U14, 15, 16 year thinking about the draft, and as what you and I might call one of those outcome goals that you don't really control, but that you can influence. So because I was a pretty good player, I was rated pretty high. I knew that I was going to get drafted, so I wasn't a player that on the bubble, kind of wondering. And then they have the central scouting lists that come out, and you hear where you are on the list. And again, we're talking about a subjective point in time at a very, when you're 15, 16 years old. Certainly doesn't define you. And if I could give anybody advice right now, don't let those moments define who you are going forward. Again, it's somebody's opinion of you when you're 15 or 16 years old. At 55, looking back at it now, it's easy to talk about it, but certainly understand how we put so much weight on, this idea of being drafted. The decision for me really came down to who was going to draft me in the OHL. Living in just outside of Toronto in Mississauga, Ontario, the OHL only had 15 teams back then, Sault Ste. Marie being the farthest, North Bay and Sudbury, being the second and third furthest away. I didn't actually think I was going to go to Sudbury. I had only interviewed with them very briefly. I was originally rated in the second round, but I didn't hide the fact that I was also interested in college. And I had talked to a lot of the university and college scouts that would come to the games. And because there was this offset where you're drafted at 16, and then you can't officially make a decision to go to school until you're in your grade 12 year. I was only in grade 11. So that offset year kind of made it difficult, and they put kids in an awkward position, I think, to make those decisions, as you're talking about now. So it is a challenge because you're kind of hedging one way or another as a 15, 16-year-old, right? Back when my dad played, you could play major junior and you could get a scholarship. And it would be great to see, the CHL, the junior leagues, and the NCAA come to some kind of agreement. And we can talk about that. But so for me, it was, I made a promise to my dad that I would finish high school if I wasn't drafted by a local team. And when Sudbury drafted me, they weren't exactly at the top of the pyramid. They didn't finish very well. They were lower at the end of the pack. We looked at all of the aspects of what it would be like if I went there, the travel, the lack of, focus on education. I was already kind of hedging towards hockey. So I found it detracted a little bit in my high school. My father was worried about that and really pushed education. So the agreement we said was if it was a local team that was, competitive, that we would consider it, at least go to camp for the 48 hours and then make a decision. When it was Sudbury, it was almost a hard no right away. So that phone call was a difficult one because, I didn't make that decision right away. I spent most of the summer considering it, training, getting ready to go to camp. And it was towards the middle, probably end of July, mid-August, when they needed an answer. And I remember the GM calling, and he was like, we've got your billet set up. We're looking forward for you to come into camp. You're registered at school. Everything had been done, almost like, and I had negotiated a 1 to 2, so 2 years of university for every year that I played junior, which, was a pretty good deal back then. Most of them were 1-to-1s. So, and we know that now that if you get drafted by an NHL team, they kind of, they give up that right or that commitment to you for college. So when he called and he was going through all of these great things, it was a very uncomfortable time for me as a 16-year-old kid to say, I've made a decision that I'm not coming to camp. But when I finally got those words out of my mouth, the response was, I knew we wasted a pick on you. Good luck. Click. So that solidified in my mind immediately that they weren't really as interested in me as maybe I thought they were. And I was comfortable with the decision right after that phone call that I'm now going to school. And I was able to now focus on, okay, I'm going to play junior B for a year and start to entertain what the NCAA offers look like.
Okay, and so did you ever play a year of junior A before going to college?
No, so back then, we had junior A. We called it Tier 2 junior A around here. And we had junior B. So junior B was the equivalent of what the Ontario Junior Hockey League or the NUL or the USHL might be now. Most of the players at my time that were going to get scholarships were playing at the junior B Metro in the Metro division, which doesn't exist anymore in Toronto. So it's now the Ontario Junior Hockey League, which is considered like Tier 2 junior A to the OHL.
Got it. Yeah, because I don't know that they even have any junior B anymore. I think they made everything junior A and then they just have different tiers. So obviously I know the USHL is going to be tier 1. I would imagine the North American League, the BCHL, the OJHL, right? Those are all going to be considered tier 2. But it's just not common to hear a player just playing junior B and then going and getting a Division I scholarship. So kudos to you. Obviously you were one hell of a player. And again, I know that there's so many players out there that struggle with that decision, right? And I know for myself, I played a year of junior B, my junior year of high school. I moved away just outside of Portland, Oregon to play for an expansion team in a league that I don't even believe exists any longer. But our home rink was the Portland Junior Winterhawks, and the Portland Winterhawks are in the WHL. And so one of their assistant coaches was a head coach for a Junior Winterhawks team, saw me play. I was young, could still get drafted, wanted to have a conversation with me. So they brought me in for a game with the Portland Winterhawks. I was also in a class with a player that played on the Portland Winterhawks, a defenseman. He wound up playing in the NHL, Michael Sauer is his name. Nonetheless, I remember because you had mentioned that, you didn't hide the fact that you would potentially want to go to college. Now here I am. I'm in this conversation with the GM of the Winterhawks, and I remember mentioning to them NCAA hockey. In the moment I mentioned that, they disregarded me. We never had another conversation. And then I get to college and only wound up being there for 1 year. And then was thinking, well, shoot, maybe I should have gone to Portland. But nonetheless, again, I know that there's these difficult conversations that have to take place. And so thank you for sharing what you did there in regards to the process and what it was like for you. Now I want to transfer into the motorcycle accident that you experienced, because I remember when we first met, we got on the phone, we had, our initial conversation. You shared a lot about that. And then obviously just now you're on your back for the next 40 days, a lot of analyzing, examining yourself. So what was that entire process like? Can you maybe take us through the accident itself and then kind of the effect that being on your back for the next 40 days had on you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what I should do is just preface a little bit before that, because we ended at at 17, 18 years old. And then there was, the accident happened when I was 45. So because a lot of what happened to me mentally in the hospital was this acceptance of decisions that I had made excuses for in that in-between period. Okay, so if we back it up before I get to your question, if that's okay.
Yep.
So I accepted this scholarship to Michigan Tech. Up until that point, life was great. Everything was on this trajectory. Rob's going to play in the NHL, right? 17 years old, getting a full ride, true freshman, going down to school, on campus for 3 days. Went to my first frat party. Hadn't started orientation or training camp yet. We were just getting settled in the dorms. Met my roommate, Damian Rhodes, who was a goaltender, played with the Leafs, played with Atlanta, played with Ottawa. Go to our first party. All the boys go. I stayed out probably a little bit longer than I should have. I was with a senior on the team, a gentleman by the name of Randy McKay. God bless him. Played in the NHL, won a Stanley Cup. And Randy was from Quebec. Pretty tough guy. He led the NHL in fighting majors 1 year. Him and I are one of a couple of guys left from the team, still at this party. He gets into a beef at the pool table with one of the other college attendees and winds up getting sucker punched. He shakes it off, looks at the guy, looks at me, grabs me, goes, "Let's go, kid." We go outside and fight 5 guys, and I break my hand. Adversity number 1.
Wow.
Hadn't started training camp. I've been on campus for 3 days. Tried to cover it up, didn't go to the hospital. I've got a boxer's fracture in my hand from punching a guy in the head. I got bruises on my face. I'm wearing a ball cap down as low as I could to try to hide it, try to hide the bruises and get through training camp unscathed. Well, you've been through a few training camps. You know what the first few days of training camp are like. A lot of testing, pull-ups, push-ups, bench press, a lot of things that are putting strain on your hand. The bone started to push its way up to the skin, and I had to go to the trainer and go, "I think there's something wrong with my hand." And, immediately they sent me to a hospital. I had to have my hand reset. Eventually, what happened came out. Coach was not very happy, and this started the downward spiral for Rob Pallante. Cut half of Randy's scholarship. I dressed for 1 game my freshman year, redshirted. Came back my second year with this expectation that I'm a young Canadian defenseman on a full ride. I should play. Oh, well, guess what? There's another group of freshmen coming in who also want to play. Played 6 games my second year. Mentally, I was in this place where I could not focus on anything other than why I wasn't playing, and not in a positive way. I was pointing the finger, I was comparing, I was blaming the coach. I just was starting to get to the place where I wasn't enjoying coming to the rink anymore. Okay? So my comeback for my third year, I'm in the lineup, I'm playing every game, I'm having my breakout year. We go to the GLIs in Detroit, Michigan Tech, Michigan, and Michigan State, and 1 invitee. We only played 2 games. I thought for sure I was a shoo-in. We skate, for a pregame skate before the first game, and they post a lineup, and then after you go and see, because there's more than enough players on a college roster. The regulars pretty much know who they are, but somebody on the fringe is always looking to see if you're in the lineup. Wasn't in the lineup for the first game. Okay? Hadn't played in the GLIs in 3 years yet. So this was a big deal. Full rink at Joe Louis, and all the scouts and everybody that you think is going to be there watching. Go out for a morning skate the next morning, weight vests on, just to get the legs going, come back in, name's not on the list. Snap. Go in the locker room, take off my vest, throw it at the coach, and rush them in the locker room. Not a good career choice. But I felt like I was pushed to a point where one person held my career in the palm of their hand and was crushing me. What I didn't realize was that I was doing this to myself. Okay, so I wind up leaving Tech in the middle of my third year, came home, played half a year at junior, and then did 2 more years at Acadia University in the U Sports League. Had a great team. Was still good enough that I was invited to 5 NHL camps, even though I missed my training, my draft year, because I had a broken hand. And then my second year, I only played 6 games. I wouldn't have drafted me either, right? So now I go through that experience playing in the minors. I go to the Minnesota North Stars camp. Coming out of college hockey, didn't do a whole lot of fighting. Day 1 in camp, I'm a big guy, like you're a big guy. I get challenged by a gentleman by the name of Reed Simpson, who was already, an established tough guy in the American League. He just got traded from Philly to Minnesota. Day 1 on the ice, puck goes in the corner, first shift. He runs me. I turn around. His gloves are off, and he's swinging. He sees this big young defenseman who he thinks he's got a challenge. I'm like in there for the fight of my life, just going, what's going on? Stood in, did well, beat the snot out of each other. 24 stitches, teeth went through my lip, zipped up, back on the ice, finished training camp. Hung around, didn't get a contract, but I played in the minors for about 3 years after that in a role that I wasn't prepared for.
Wow.
But I did what I thought I had to do to stay relevant, and completely got away from the player that I used to be. That led to other things. Drinking, drugs, women, all of those sort of things that what I thought accompanied that kind of role of a person in the minor leagues. And I wasn't mentally strong enough to pull myself out of that and recognize I still had the ability within me to play at that level. It was just going to mean me showing up with a better version of myself than what I was bringing to the rink every day.
You sharing your story there about, still having invites to NHL camps, but it sounds like you were lost. And I speak from experience on myself that you were lost before those NHL camps in complaining, right? Blaming other people for the situation that you were in. So would you say then that you were lost in that victimhood? Again, not willing to take accountability for your actions, not understanding that we are all free to choose, right? But we're not free from the consequences of our choices. And I know for myself that at the beginning of my career on an NHL contract, I was completely lost in being a victim, blaming, complaining, remembering what, the GM of the Ducks was saying, the guy that, was interested and ultimately led to me signing with the Ducks, telling me these things about, I'm coming in to replace Scott Niedermayer. Okay, that didn't happen. Oh, I'm a victim. Oh, blah, 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 this and that. So would you say that's exactly where you were lost during those times? It was lost in that victimhood?
Brother, like 110%. I mean, that's the poison. We look in the mirror and it's hard to accept that, right? Because everything leading up to that is, all these great things that come to you so easily. What you're not prepared for, what I try to do with the young players I work with today, is prepare them for that. You might be on this escalated ride and everybody's telling you how great you are. I promise you, I don't care who you are going to be challenged. Life is going to throw something at you. And if you're not prepared to accept that full spectrum of what that outcome could be, then you're not going to be able to get over that hurdle. And, we talk about process over outcome. I was so focused on outcomes, I was taking myself out of the process, which was get up and master the mundane things, Rob. Get up, hydrate, get rest, go to the gym, work harder than everybody else. Yes, I had talent, and talent carried me to a certain point. But Jacob, you know this, when talent meets talent, what takes you to the next level? It's this and what you have in there. It's not your physical skills, because everybody's talented at that level. So that was a big wake-up call for me. And then you start playing the blame game, right? It's the coaches, it's other guys, it's this, that's my ice time. No, those are all earned. And the blame game is a real slippery slope. So was I a victim? Man, I was the biggest victim.
Capital V and a capital I.
I can look back at it now. I was like Al Bundy, if you remember. From we always talk about being the quarterback at Polk High, right? I was that guy, right? And I sit around and drink beers and tell everybody about how great I used to be. How much potential did I leave on the table? I can look back. I don't regret it, but I learned from those decisions. So when I'm talking to a young player today, honest to God, I look at him and I talk to him like I'm the 17-year-old sitting across from myself.
Yeah, I think that's so much of our work. Yeah.
And add that to who they are and develop the person and the character, the hockey stuff will take care of itself.
Yeah, 100%, brother. And I know that we're so aligned in that thinking that, okay, we get a new client, we get a new kid, he's 15, 16, 17-year-old. They come to us, or maybe it's their parents that come to us, and they think all we're going to talk about is hockey. But it's time for these players, these young athletes, and hell, even athletes that are at the professional level, they need to realize that they are more human than they are athlete. So the stuff that happens in our personal human life, if we're not taking care of that, right, at some point it's going to bleed into our on ice performance. So again, we were victims, right? We had such incredible physical skill, right, that people want to say God-given skill, sure, but we had to work at it. In order for that skill to elevate and to be maximized, we had to put in the hard work. So would you say then that the game, I know there's stats out there, 80 to 90%, mental. In my opinion, it's all mental, because at some point, the physical work and the physical movements, your stride, your shot mechanics, right? Working out in the gym, all of that stuff becomes subconsciously programmed. And then it's all about, can you overcome your mind to get yourself to the levels that you can get to? But because so many players don't have their mindset working for them, it's then working against them. And then their physical skill is essentially irrelevant.
Oh, I agree. So when I'm presenting to a team, one of the first slides I put up, is a quote from Wayne Gretzky. I mean, he did pretty good playing the game. And the quote from him is, "Hockey is 90% mental, and the other half is physical." Kids look at that sometimes, young guys, and they go, well, they're trying to do the math on that, right? 90% mental, and the other half is physical. You got to take a moment to think about it. But if the greatest player in the game is telling you that it's 90% mental, and then I'll ask the kids, how much time did you spend this week working on your shot, working on your nutrition, working on your skating skills? Oh, everybody's got their hand up, an hour here, 2 hours, 6. How many guys spent more than 20 minutes working on their mental game this week? Crickets.
Yeah.
So, to your point, if we're not developing that 6-inch space between our ears, that muscle, I don't care how much God-given talent you have, because I can tell you, and I'm sure you can admit to this too, how many guys did you know that had more talent than other guys that didn't make it?
The numbers through the roof. Yeah.
One of those guys, right?
Yeah, no, it's crazy. And I love, the work that you're doing and trying to equip these younger athletes with tools so that when the adversity strikes, they're more equipped to manage themselves in the face of that adversity. And I think so many players are experiencing the lulls, the ebbs and the flows, but those slumps, they last so much longer because they're not in control of their mental state, and therefore they're not in control of themselves emotionally. Right?
They're trying to solve a mental problem with physical effort.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. I mean, I know I can feel it going on the ice, trying to push myself to do things physically, but my head is the one that needed the exercise.
Yeah. And I think in the game of hockey, and in the game of sports in general, Everybody's being told you got to create separation between yourself and the competition. And of course, yes, we do. So when people hear that, they instantly and subconsciously go straight towards the physical. So they're working on their sleep. That's great. They're working on, recovery. That's great. They're working on explosiveness, being more aggressive, being stronger, bigger, faster, stronger. But there is no real separation there because everybody's doing the same thing. Not enough people are working on their mindset. So again, you can have all the skill, but again, if you don't have, positive thinking taking place after a mistake made, like you're a shell of yourself. And so many players struggle with confidence. But again, they struggle with confidence, but they're not in control of their thinking.
What I believe one of the reasons is, how do you measure that?
Yeah, it's not tangible.
Not tangible. It's not a measurable thing. You can't go, well, I shot 100 pucks, so I can see my shot is getting better. I've been working on my edges and my footwork, so my agility and my speed is getting better, right? I've been lifting weights, so I feel stronger. Well, I'm doing all of those things, but I'm still not getting the ice I want, or I'm not making the plays. Why? Well, because like you said, you're not working on the mental skills that don't have a way to measure. Right? There's not a measurable scale in place. There is in the way that you feel and your emotions when you start to put those visualization, meditation, breath work into play. And then you all of a sudden are in a situation where before you might not be able to get past that mistake because now you're going out onto the next shift and you're still thinking about that mistake from last shift or 2 shifts ago. What I call it's you're carrying bricks, right? So I tell the kids, I go, imagine you're wearing a backpack and you go out and you make a mistake, right? And now if you don't have the skills to recover on the bench to go back out there and you're still thinking about that situation in the past, that's a 5-pound brick. Put that in your backpack. And now you're thinking about the future, about something that, if I don't do this, then I'm not going to get on the ice. I might not get power play. I'm not going to score goals. Well, that hasn't happened yet because it's in the future. That's another 5-pound brick. By the time you're done, you got 20, 30 pounds of bricks. Now go out and play that shift. How are you going to play? How do we take off the backpack?
Yeah. And I know the answer to that. And we need more players out there in the world understanding the answer there is it's all mental, and there was a study done on the top 25 tennis players in the world. And they wanted to see what was the biggest difference between the top 5 and the remaining 20. And the biggest differentiator between the top 5 and the top 25 was where their thinking goes after a mistake is made. So the top 5 players in the world, they go towards positivity, and the remaining 20 go towards negativity. So it has literally nothing to do with the physical, and it has everything to do with the mental. So what do you think it's going to take for more athletes? And obviously we're working primarily with hockey players. What do you think it's really going to take for teams and individuals to really open themselves up to understanding the importance of the mindset training?
God, I wish I had that answer. Right?
Me too.
If I had that answer, brother, you and I would be laughing all the way to the bank. But I think it's more individuals like you and I that have had the experience. And what I like to tell people, if I can get them to listen, players and parents, is my job is to save you time. Right? We all have the same amount. How we use that is going to determine our success going forward, right? If I can help you save time and not have to deal with the challenges and the adversity that is going to come on your own, and you can build those skills today, when it does come, you're better prepared. That could cost you 5 years. It could cost you 10. It might be your career. Why wouldn't you want to build that foundation now? Oh, and guess what? We have this whole thing called life that the average expectancy is mid 80s right now. Hockey is like this much of what your life is. Those skills transcend the what we're teaching, transcend the game. And so, what we're doing is building a foundation for life. Honestly, if a kid that I work with plays in the NHL, awesome. Is that my goal? No, I don't care. I want to make better people.
Yeah. And I think in this space right now, in regards to mental performance, I think there's new people coming into this space, and it's starting to feel a lot like the agency world. Agents, there's so freaking many out there. We know 99% of them are all scummy, selfish, truly just looking out for themselves. Now in the mental performance space, I feel like people are coming in and they're trying to recreate the wheel. They're trying to make things so complex to stand out. But when it comes to mental performance training, mindset training, what people need is simplicity. They don't need to look at a worksheet or look at a program online and be confused and not be able to relate it to their direct experience. So I think, again, in this space, there's so many people coming into it because it's a lot more trendy now, right? In regards to maximizing on ice performance. But kind of what's your approach? You don't have to share obviously everything, right? But what is your approach? Do you like to create simplicity for these players, or are you trying to recreate the wheel?
Well, what I'm trying to do is just create a relationship.
Amen. Amen.
If I've got a young person and I can build a relationship with them and earn their trust, that's a big thing for me. I have to earn their trust and allow them to open up and talk about things. And it might start with sports because, hey, mom and dad might have, put them in front of the camera, and you got this, gray bearded guy sitting there with some hockey pictures in the back, and they're looking going, okay, buddy, like, what have you done and who are you? And, I can Google you, and, you look at your stats, and, you didn't do anything fantastic, but that's fine. But if I can build that relationship with that person, now I can start to lay that foundation down, and I can start to get through to them. And now guess what? The things that they're struggling with on the ice, all of a sudden become things that might be happening off the ice, right? And I share with people that I think if you're competing as a high-level athlete, you're always in one of three phases. You're in preparation, you're in competition and or training, and you're in recovery, right? And there's a routine in each one of those. I mean, you can break it right down to your on ice in between shift routine. You're in competition. So that starts from the time you wake up till the time you go to bed. And if you're willing to commit to those things in each one of those phases and know which phase you're in, how you're transitioning, and mastering the mundane things, you're setting yourself up for success regardless of whether it's in the sport or life. And so that's, after I earn the trust and we start to break it down and we talk about different areas of sport and life and we show how they intersect, but paint a picture that we have to accept all outcomes and be prepared for them. Yes, there's positivity and there's negativity. I personally like to bring us to what I call neutral, right? And the parable of the Japanese farmer. I don't have to share that. But what that does is it allows you to operate from a less emotional state because you're able to make better decisions. And they're not emotional decisions. Because I'm guessing if you were like me, when you made emotional decisions, the outcome was less impactful.
Amen. Amen to that. And I think when we're in such a highly emotional state, we're not able to see reality for what it is. We're seeing it through the lens of what our mind and the stories that are being created up there. But I love the trust aspect because I think that's number one. And anytime you're working with a new client, you have to build that trust so that in time they feel safe and comfortable in sharing things with you that perhaps has nothing to do with hockey. So I know my approach in my first two sessions with any client is to provide them with a tool that's going to get them results. They're going to be able to feel the benefits from them. And then through that, they realize, oh, shoot, okay, these tools work. Clearly, this guy might know what he's talking about. I'm a little bit more trustworthy of anything else he's going to have to say. Have you ever had a situation where you weren't able to build that trust with the person and then maybe they left working with you?
Knock on wood, not yet. I've had situations where in that initial interview, because before I work with a client, I want to do a FaceTime with the client. I'll have the parents there if they're underage, of course. But then I want to have that dialogue with that individual. And there's been a couple of times where I could just tell there wasn't going to be a fit, right? from both sides. And that's okay. Like, I'm not for everybody, right? And I'm okay with that. And that's why there's other people like yourself. The world needs more of what we do. We can't service all of the individuals and the athletes out there that are struggling right now. And there's a lot of them. But A, they have to be open to it. If a parent is forcing a kid to sit in front of me, I can tell right away. And I tell the parents, if he feels like he's being forced, this isn't going to work. I explain to them, I go, think of me like the Sherpa who's helping you climb the mountain. You want to get to the top? I'll show you the path, but you got to pick up the luggage and take the steps, and one step at a time. And if you're not willing to do that, you're not going to get anything out of the program. But I'm guessing that's probably falling into other areas of your life too.
Absolutely. And players need to understand that how they do one thing is how they do everything. So if they're in a new situation, they're working with a mental performance coach and they're wishy-washy on doing the work, then I would imagine they're wishy-washy in their approach on the ice. And so therefore the results are what they are,
Yep.
right? And it's about them as individuals taking ownership of those results or lack thereof. I think there's a lot of resistance still in this space. And maybe you would agree with the fact that I think there would be more players willing to open themselves up to entertaining at least this type of work. But I think still mental health is still attached to this space. And so I know for myself, my approach is to never even mention mental health because, again, especially within boys and men, there's still that resistance, but undoubtedly their mental health is going to improve. But I love, because you had mentioned earlier that you work with other athletes outside of hockey, right? You had mentioned football. I think, did you say tennis? Swimming. There you go. Olympic level swimmer. That's the best part because a lot of times I'll hear from people, well, you didn't play this sport, so how are you going to be able to help? Well, sure, but I'm not training even my hockey clients on hockey. They've got coaches for that.
Yeah.
I am here to my teachings, my guidance, it's universal. And I know it's the same for you. Again, we are trying to develop the person, and then whatever sport they play, they're going to be able to handle it because they've been playing it for X amount of years. Again, they have coaches that are helping them to understand the game better, but it's for that specific sport. So
yeah, no, I mean, you know what a big part of it too is, and it's right in the name of your podcast, it's being vulnerable. Like if I'm talking with a swimmer, I'm the worst swimmer in the world. I swim, I'm Italian. I say oil and water don't mix. I swim like a rock, right? So, when I was working with this young swimmer, she was in her senior year and trying to get a scholarship and trying out for the Canadian Olympic team. I go, look, right off the bat, you're going to have to educate me about swimming because I don't know the language, the terms, and I learned so much working with her. I would go to the competitions, I would go to the meets. It's stepping outside of my comfort zone. I could easily just say, well, I'm just going to go to the rink because I know the rink and I know the hockey and I'm prepared for that. I stepped outside of my comfort zone working in a sport that I know nothing about. And, the great part for me is that I had a client who was also willing to share. And you'll find that, people like to talk about themselves and their sports. I ask a lot of questions, as I'm sure you do. That's how we peel back the layers of an individual. And if I don't know something, I'm the first one to say, I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about. Explain it to me. We take a couple of minutes and she shares what it is that she's referring to, whether it's her time splits or the different strokes and how her body moves in the water. And sometimes I'll get on that whiteboard and I'll draw it out. We'll map out, her training based on, where the gaps are in her swim, right? What's she thinking about at the, when she's standing on the blocks? How does she warm up? What's going through her mind if she's in a 50-yard versus a 200-yard? At what point do you feel like you're, mentally starting to become fatigued? We'll map that out and look at it. And now I have points of reference where I can include the parts of the mental game that I know. I don't need to know the sport. And that's been rewarding for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it just completely expands your clientele. right? And everybody is always like, you got to find your niche, whatever it is. Okay. So for us, obviously, because we played hockey, it is hockey for us, but we are so much more than just people that work with hockey players. Again, it's all universal. We could work with non-athletes, which I'm sure you have at some point, and maybe you do currently.
A couple of corporate clients.
Yep, exactly. There you go. And so I'm the same way. It's the same approach. You got to build that trust to start out with anybody you're working with. One thing I know you and I spoke about months ago when we first had that initial conversation is that it's one thing for a man or a boy to open up to a woman, because I know there's a lot of women in the mental performance space, and that's powerful. But I feel as though it's a lot easier for a man to open up to a woman. I think it's true strength when a man opens up to another man. So I'm not saying all of that to say women need to be out of this space, but I think when it comes to building a man, a masculine man, to have another man to open up to, I think just amplifies the work that's being done. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. And that's not to slight any of the ladies that are listening to this that do what we do. But I think that, our society is kind of pushing the masculinity out of being a man. And at the risk of sounding like a chauvinist, I think that young boys need to have that in their life. And, there's a higher divorce rate now than there has been in a long time. Guilty of it. My kids are a part of it. And what I try and do is supply, if I can, be that anchor. And I have a number of young hockey players that I work with that come from a single mom home. And so if I can provide that male figure or role model on top of what I'm doing from the mental perspective, they're all like my kids. And I think it that's the rewarding part. Like I love what I do so much. I wish I didn't need to get paid for it. Fortunately, we have bills to pay and families to raise as well. I very rarely say no to people, and I try not to make it about money. But going back to your point without getting away from that is, yeah, I think that there are a lot of women in this space, and there's a lot of them that are very good. And I think that there's, for the younger men, the young boys, and I'll say like 12 to 16, 17, I think that's where having a male role model or mentor is most important. Once they get to that 17, 18, now they're becoming young men. Hopefully, they've got a solid foundation to move forward from. The other part of it is being an ex-athlete, I think, is key to this role. There's a lot of smart people that have sat in classrooms and gotten their psychology degrees. But if you can't, and it goes back to that relational part at the beginning and earning the trust, I can look at any athlete at any level and say, I've been where you are, maybe not in that sport. I know what you're feeling. I've been through it. I've played the comparison game. I've played the victim game. I've done that. And I've sat on the bench or in the stands and I've watched like you are. That's powerful. It's not something I learned from a book, not something I learned in a classroom. That's a feeling and an emotion that I hope comes out in the conversation that creates that relationship. And it's not because I'm a woman.
Yeah, well, of course. And those are real life experiences that, in my opinion, far exceed what a degree and what they learned in a classroom, right? In the textbook, because again, firsthand experience. And I know there's so many people out there that say experience over degrees, right? I can't tell you how many freaking mental health facilities, private practices, whatever, that I've applied to that I couldn't even have a conversation with anybody because I don't have that psychology or social work degree. So I would literally start showing up to offices to hand them my resume so that they can just have a conversation with me. I didn't have a single conversation because, again, I don't have those degrees. So again, we're not here saying that women need to be out of this space, because I know there's women in this space that you said are incredible, right? They're relatable. Maybe they played the game themselves, maybe they didn't. But I think that, for the individual or for the family that's getting ready to put their money into something, you need your son or daughter to have a connection with this person and be able to be relatable with this person. And once you have those two things, again, I think that just opens up the door for the individual to be more open about what they're experiencing and perhaps what their struggles are.
Big time. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's get into the accident now. Again, thank you for sharing everything you did. But this in the end is a mental health podcast. So I would love to know, again, those 40 days. I can imagine the feelings, the emotions that you were experiencing, the what the hell, the doubts, the inner critic. I could imagine. So where were you at mentally during those 40 days?
Yeah. So, leading up to that, the accident happened on August 22nd, 2015. 8 months before that, my ex-wife and I sat in front of the kids and told them we were splitting. I stayed in the house until the end of school, and then I moved out. And I was couch surfing at a buddy's place, bought myself a Harley earlier that year. And, so I was dealing with the separation, not being with my kids, the trauma of, am I a bad person? Am I wrong? Do I stay with it for the kids? And there was a lot of soul searching that went on just through that, leading up to the accident. All of this culminating in a Saturday morning. I was riding my Harley down from a buddy's place that he was letting me crash at to the house where my ex and the kids were living, which I just moved out of a couple months earlier. I was a block away from the house on a 2-lane road, and car coming this way at me. I'm going that way. She made a left-hand turn while she was on her phone. I looked at her. I thought she saw me, and there was a dump truck parked at a stop sign here. So I had to try and swerve when I saw her make the turn and not hit the dump truck. Broadsided me. I got tossed about 35 feet. I don't remember anything after being hit other than about 15 seconds in the ambulance, waking up. Tremendous amount of pain surged through my body, looked down, and God bless the emergency response people who were there working frantically, cutting off my pants, my shoes, and I just said, am I going to die? And then woke up 2 days later in ICU. I had broken my ribs down the front and the back. I had a punctured lung. I had 2 tears in my aorta, shattered my elbow, fractured my scapula, ruptured my spleen, shattered my ankle. I was bleeding out internally, and my kidneys failed. So the first night in the hospital, the doctors told my family that they should get a priest if they were inclined, because they weren't sure I was going to make it through the night.
Wow.
So, given my last rites, spoiler alert, I made it.
Here you are, baby.
It was a very, very difficult time, not for me, but I don't even think about myself, but for my family. My kids were still young at the time, 9 and 7. They see their father, laid up in a hospital. That day, I was actually going to pick up my daughter to take her to the end of to her little soccer festival that they have. I was going to put her on the back because the field was just a couple blocks away. And I thank God, I did not have her on the bike, because her little body wouldn't have lasted. Being a bigger guy, the doctors told me that's probably what saved me. And, I remember, to this day, it was when I got out of ICU and I had a nurse come to me, and she said, we've had people in here with much less injuries than you that haven't survived. You've been given a second chance at life. Don't waste it. I've forgotten that. And, it just kind of opened me up to, what does that mean? What does this next half of my life need to look like? Who am I? What kind of person am I? What kind of father am I? There's a lot of soul searching. Up until that point, I was the Al Bundy guy making all the excuses for why I didn't play in the NHL. Oh man, you had so much talent. What happened? Wow, this happened, that happened. I didn't get a shot. This guy wanted me to fight, and I became, a drunk, and all of these things, right? And what I owned when I left the hospital was all of those decisions and all of the finger pointing, I realized, were all controlled by decisions that I made. And originally, I was told that I was going to be in for 120 days. And I'm laying there going, my poor ex-wife, divorce isn't even, close to being over. She's saddled with this. I know it's a mental drain on her. She's got the 2 young kids. Here's the other part of it. My parents, who eventually, after I got out of the hospital, opened up their basement to me. But the same day that I got in my accident, my mom's mother passed away. So she was in the hospital at a different hospital, recovering from a broken hip. My parents get this phone call in the morning to come to Hamilton General. Your son's been in a motorcycle accident, probably not going to survive. They go through all of that. I'm getting, the priest. They go home, and there's a message at home from the hospital saying that your mother passed away. I can't imagine. And now, being Italian, my mother thinks my grandmother gave up her life.
For you. Wow. Wow. With that right there, I don't know when you learned of that or when your mother shared that with you. Once it was shared with you, what went through your mind? Was there any guilt, any shame, anything like that?
Oh, I get choked up talking about it.
Yeah. 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 It's powerful stuff, brother. And I don't know what type of relationship you had with your grandmother.
Close. We're close family,
Yeah. Italian. Yeah.
She moved in with my parents because my grandfather passed away. She wasn't at a position where she could live on her own anymore. So what do? You take care of your parents, right?
Right.
They're in.
Yeah.
We had being Italian, we had a full apartment in the basement, which is where I did my recovery. There was a kitchen, a bedroom, a bathroom, everything, a living room. So it made it easy for me when I was going through my recovery after I got out of the hospital. Didn't think it was fair to move back in with my ex-wife. Certainly wasn't going to move in with my buddy and put that burden on him. So my parents are like, come here. Had a hospital bed put in the basement. And for the next 2 months, I recovered there.
Okay.
Then eventually back to my buddy's house.
Gotcha. And what did that do for your relationship with your parents during those 2 months?
Oh, I mean, I could never repay my parents for what they've done for me through my career, being supportive through, all of the different troubles that I've been through, the marriage, the divorce, my taking care of my kids, my grandmother. It's just this constant outpour of unconditional love.
Yeah, man, that's powerful. Again, for your parents being willing to take you back in, right? When you're a physically grown man, right? And one thing that I think in regards to mindsets and people's mentalities is I think that people think just because they're older, they're physically grown, they're 25, 35, 45, that they're mature just because of that, or they're grown. Like, the amount of times I've heard other men say, "Don't speak to me that way. I'm a grown ass man." The amount of times I've heard that is astronomical. And it's in my opinion that you might be physically grown, but emotionally you're still a child.
Let's ego talking too, right?
Yeah, big time ego, all caps on all the letters. Would you agree with that? Like, because I know that there's obviously a lot of players in the NHL that aren't working on their mindset. Right, they're at the highest level in the world, right? But I would be willing to say that your average 30-year-old in the NHL, yes, they are physically gifted and they're physically grown, but they are still emotionally childlike. And you can find out how childlike you are when you don't get what you want, or when things happen that challenge you mentally. Then you realize, holy shit, I'm acting like I did when I was 7 or I was 8. So when you experience your accident at the age of 45, yes, you were physically 45 years old. You were a physically grown man. But would you say then at that point you were still emotionally nowhere near where you needed to be?
Well, I've grown more in the last 10 years since the accident than the previous 45.
Yeah.
It's a whole enlightenment. It was an aha moment for me. I say it was the worst day and the best day of my life. It was the turning point for me to become a better person. It opened up this whole connection for me between the body and the mind. Like I said, I was told I was going to be in there for 120 days. I walked out in 40. Okay. And I never once looked at, very, very rarely, I would say, looked at a phone. I never watched TV. All I did was read. And the first book that I actually read when I was in there was Think and Grow Rich. And that was the book that changed the trajectory along with this whole experience. Why did that show up, that book at that time at 45 years old, show up in my hands as I'm sitting laying in a hospital, right? And so what it allowed me to do was take a step back, put my ego aside, stop chasing material things, because I was just chasing material things. I thought, so you talk about these 30-something-year-old NHL players, right? They've got money, they've got cars, women, they've got everything they want, but they're still not happy, right? That's the emotional part you're talking about, because all their life they think that when I get here, I will have everything. That's what I call the finish line syndrome. We never, ever, ever arrive, ever. We never get there. And so we're constantly in this perpetual motion of becoming. And you don't ever really become. And that's okay, right? And the challenge we have as adults is thinking that, well, I've got the cars, I've got the money, I've got everything I need. Oh, well, now I'm not going to play. I'm been demoted to the third line, or they're sending me to the American League. Or are you kidding me? That's the biggest issue in your life? Look around at what's going on in the world. Let's take a perspective that, that's not so myopic. Go 35,000 feet up and now take a look. Is it that bad? You can't go down to the American League for 2 weeks on a conditioning stint? Oh, you got bumped off the first line? Oh, you're not paying on the power play? Oh, boo-hoo. You think at this stage I feel sorry for you? No, you are mentally weak. Or you better have a look, or take a look around and figure out the guys that I'll use a guy like John Tavares. Okay, I think he understands he's near the end of his career, and what he's had to do to stay relevant is change the way that he's played. He's had to change his role, his attitude, the way he shows up. Doesn't mean he's not a leader, and doesn't mean he's not contributing, but he's figured out a way to stay relevant. And it might not be by producing points. And laymen will look and go, well, he's making all this money and he's not producing points. There's an intangible sometimes that a player can bring to the game that is more important than outcomes.
And the Maple Leafs got guys that are going to produce the points, like that. And John Tavares, how incredible is he in the faceoff circle? That right there is worth $10 million a year,
right?
Especially come playoff time.
How big of an ego is that to have, for him to say, I'm going to step down as your captain and I'm going to pass the torch. Yep. And I'm still going to be here and I'm going to be as relevant as I can and I'm going to support the team. Mm-hmm. How many guys would do that?
Right. It's crazy. The number is so little, when you think about that. And it's all crazy, man. Again, it's, the mindset stuff, it all too often it's getting overlooked. And you had said something there earlier that I want to challenge a little bit. You said that people are mentally weak. I am in the belief that everybody has mental strength, but what they lack is mental stamina. So whenever maybe it's a first experience or facing adversity for the first time, sure, they can handle that. But when it happens again the next day or the next week or the next month, that's when you really start to see the weakness and the lack of mental stamina.
Yeah. I use a little formula that I give to everybody that I coach. And it's E plus R equals O. Event plus response equals outcome. Okay. And I think what you and I are talking about, we choose different words and we can challenge the words, but the words really are semantics. Okay. Event plus response equals outcome. In that formula, we do not control the event and we do not control the outcome. The only thing we control is our response. And typically you have two choices in your response. It's an emotional or a behavioral response. Emotional is typically not going to lead you to a productive outcome. A behavioral will. And it was a quote from the Jewish doctor that went through the Holocaust and survived. And he said, there's a moment between stimulus and response where you have to choose. Okay. And this is something that I really try and preach to the athletes that I work with, is you have the ability to choose your response. And maybe it's, instead of that emotional immediate response, we take a breath and think about that response and how we respond and how that's going to affect the outcome. So I totally agree with what you're talking about, mental stamina. And that's something that needs to be worked on, right? You don't just go out and run a 10K, right? You eventually build up your stamina. You might start with a block and then get to a 2K, a 5K, but your stamina will improve through repetition, right? And I use rituals, routines, and repetition over and over and over again. The mental part of the game needs practice just like the physical. And you need to consider all of those potential outcomes and how you are going to respond when they happen, if they happen.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, because with this podcast, I like providing insights and tools for people, some guidance for people to help themselves. And obviously, this is free content. People don't have to pay to, listen to this podcast. So when it comes there, earlier you had just spoken on our responses or our reactions to the things that happen, whether somebody says something or somebody does something. Typically, people are very reactive with their response. So in that moment, if you don't know, okay, I need to take some deep breaths first before I have a response to this situation. And so perhaps after the situation's done, you had a reaction that maybe you're not fond of, you're not proud of. So what you can do later in the day when you're no longer in that situation is visually take yourself back to the experience where you reacted instead of breathing. And you can visually take yourself through a practice of just correcting that quote unquote mistake so that in the future, when life presents us with another beautiful opportunity to be responsive, you are now equipping yourself with the understanding, I just need to take some deep breaths first, right? And that's going to change the outcome of whatever that situation was.
Yeah. You're doing mental reps.
Yeah.
Right? Mental reps, are just as important as the physical reps. Because the physical body doesn't know the difference between what you're thinking and what you're doing.
Amen. Hear that one more time, guys. And this is something that I use with my clients as well, is that, again, the mind and the body don't know the difference between an event happening in real time or one that you create from thought alone. So that right there is why visualization may or may not be the single-handed most important tool that players need to be using, taking advantage of in regards to mental performance. And if you're working with a mental performance coach that is not guiding you on visualization, I hope they're doing great things with you outside of that. But if they never bring it up, you need to go find somebody else, because that's what a lot of players are already visualizing. They just don't know that they are.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. They're not, they can enhance the way they visualize. Right.
Of course.
I've worked with Dr. Pierre Beauchamp, who just came back from his 7th Olympic Games. He's in his 70s, and I've been fortunate enough to spend a little bit of time with him. The Olympic standard for visualization with an Olympic level athlete is 3 15-minute sessions a day.
Wow. But just think about that. 3 15-minute sessions a day. We're talking 45 minutes. That, in my opinion, and I'm sure you agree, will take you further than anything physical. Like, if a player wants to get bigger, faster, stronger, the amount of physical time that's going to take to get to those things is crazy. It's going to take a month, 2 months, 3 months, right? And in a time when everybody is so lost in needing and wanting that instant gratification, mental training will give you that to you. It does not require the same amount of work that the physical side does. So even more so, why are we not capitalizing on it?
Turn off your electronics, close your eyes in silence, because we live in this microwave world where people want immediate. What they don't realize is how much faster their success will come, as you just said, by spending 10 minutes a day visualizing. Never mind the Olympic standard. Just do 10 minutes a day.
Yeah.
Just quiet, without a phone, without any kind of stimulus. It's hard. Young people today can't sit for 10 minutes. Even with the team that I coach, I try to get them to do 5 minutes. Just sit when we're together. Sit in the locker room, close your eyes, 5 minutes. We're 13, 14-year-olds. They're still trying to open an eye. They're gig. Like, guys, just sit quietly, right? And just try and think about things you need to do on the ice. Think about situations, right? Positive or negative, because you can take those, just as you said, think about later in the day that mistake that you make. How would you have handled that differently? Visualize it. Now you're doing a mental rep to get yourself out of that situation again or make a better decision. Guess what? Next time you're in that, if you've thought about that or you've done that mental rep, your body's going to go, oh, I've been here before. I know what to do. The reaction time now becomes quicker.
Yeah. So would you say then if players are not doing that, do they actually have a choice in the moment when the reaction comes?
Well, they have a choice. You always have a choice, but your choice and the reaction time might be slower, right?
Yeah.
So you hear the term, he's a slow hockey player. That's not always referring to his foot speed. That could be referring to decision time, right? How many young players get in a situation, and it's one of the questions I ask, do you ever hesitate? Oh, I should have shot, I should pass. What's your gut telling you to do? And I tell players, trust your gut, right? Trust your gut. But the quicker you can make those decisions, hockey's a chaotic game. There's bodies moving all over the place. Yes, we have breakouts and neutral zone exits and entries and, offensive zone plays, but how often do they actually work the way that you draw them out on a rink, right? They don't, because there are things that are out of your control. The other team, referees, ice conditions, all of these things that you don't control. So your reaction time, your hockey IQ needs to improve. And the best way to work on that is watching video and then visualizing yourself in those situations.
Yeah. Using video to build confidence and comfort when we're out on the ice, which leads to more patience and poise with the puck, right? Brother, I would love to continue this going. I've got a client here in 12 minutes, but two things before we leave. First, any last advice? I know you've shared a lot. Any last advice for any players out there that maybe are on the border, maybe on the bubble of getting into some mental performance? And then after that, could you just follow up with where people can find you in regards to social media?
My last advice to anybody is understand that who you become in the process is more important than the outcome. Who you become in the process is more important than the outcome. And if you're considering using a mental performance coach, absolutely, reach out to Jacob or anybody else in the field that might be close to you or your organization. Personally, I just want to see kids getting that understanding. I think whether it's you, me, or somebody else, I think it's important that they explore that with their families. And for me personally, I'm available at my company is called Mindset Body Bank. And in my program, it's the connection between the mind and the body and making deposits into yourself. That's the bank, right? And if you're at the end of the day, if you've created a list of things that you need to achieve or do, we talked about all those routines. I have a little, I call it a success checklist that I create for all of my athletes. And it's a great little visual tool. And at the end of the day, did you make a deposit to yourself today or a withdrawal? And if you made a withdrawal, that's okay. You're going to have those days. Let's not have them back to back, right? And so you can find me on Instagram at Mindset Body Bank, Facebook Mindset Body Bank, and my website is mindsetbodybank.com.
There we go. Awesome. Well, thank you to everybody that tuned in and listened to this podcast here. I'm hoping there's a lot of athletes out there that listen to this. Again, thank you, Rob, so much for coming on. And I love that you were willing to get a little choked up there. I saw a little bit of tears. I love that, brother. I know how powerful that vulnerability is. And the fact that you're willing to go there, I can just imagine the type of, stuff and the guidance that you're giving to any clients that you work with. So kudos to you, brother. Again, thank you for sharing all that you did. So much love and respect for you. And again, for all the listeners, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with as many people as you possibly can. That's going to be it for now. We'll see y'all next time.
This is a SportsE Media production, part of QuietLoud Studios, the podcast network where reflection meets amplification.